One of the biggest problems I think we have in many countries at the moment with issues like climate change and net zero is that many in the population have lost connection with the truly productive parts of society. They don't have a clue, in fact, where the wealth comes from. So slogans like net zero, which will actually cripple the economy, it doesn't actually mean anything to them. To people in the cloistered big cities, food comes from the shop, not from the farm. And electricity just comes out of the wall socket. It's sort of almost by magic. They don't, for example, know in Australia how much we have to export so they can import their EV or their iPhone and things like that. And so it's easy for them to suggest that, oh, well, let's just close down the coal industry because they don't understand how crucial it is to our economy. They also don't understand that, yes, you can impose methane laws on our cattle industry and close down our cattle industry. And that, is just miraculous. It won't affect them in any way, but of course it will. So in this video, I'm going to look at how the economy of Australia works and how we pay for all our imports. And we'll make a comment at the end how it seems that the productive part of society, which are often in the regions, are not appreciated by the, I won't say unproductive, majority that are in the big cities. So let's have a look at this particular table of exports of Australia. Right up the top there, we have iron ore at, 21% of our exports, coal at 14%, natural gas 10%. Education-related travel expenses, that's actually the universities, mostly visa scamming, selling visas, pretending to have a super-duper high-quality education system that everybody wants to come to, but actually people are coming for permanent residence, and why do you blame them? But it's not a proper export. Gold, beef, aluminium, wheat. In fact, if you look at, just four of the major export industries, it's 50% of our export. And this whole list is dominated by things that are produced in the country, not in the cities. Now, rather than look at these statistics in the way that, billions of dollars, which really doesn't mean a lot to anybody, I thought I'd do it in a slightly different way so that people in the inner cities can actually get a real feel where their wealth comes from when they buy an iPhone or a coffee or whatever, or they have an overseas holiday, which has to be paid for by our exports. And so my unit of, rather than money, is going to be how many wagons of coal do we need to export so that you in the city can buy this thing? Now, why a wagon of coal, Bess? Because coal is evil. And I want people to feel guilty when they buy something that's been bought with by coal. But the second reason is that my son-in-law works at a coal mine, and we're very proud of him. We want to tell you just how much he has to do. So you can buy your EV from China, or you from Thailand, or your rooftop solar panel from China, or whatever. Now, the average coal train is 84 wagons. They're big. Three locomotives, 84 wagons, and each wagon is 80 tons of coal. Each ton of coal is very, very roughly, and the numbers I'm going to use are pretty rough right throughout here, about 200 Aussie dollars. So round figures, about $16,000 for a wagon of coal. The whole train is worth 1.3 million, and my son-in-law takes, he tells me, about 1 hour 48 minutes to load that. All right, so what's your average car worth? The one you drive around in the city? Well, Australia imports about $37 billion worth of cars, $37,000 worth roughly. So my son-in-law has to reload 2 wagons for your car. Now let's look at petrol that you need to put in your car. We imported at roughly $1 a litre, and it turns out, if you do the sums, that 8 cars for 1 year will need to load 1 wagon. So 1 wagon of coal for each 8 cars per year. Now, of course, the inner city elites would be very, very happy to close down the coal industry and probably believe you can't have a car either. So let's go to something that really affects them. That is their phone, which they're addicted to. Well, it turns out that you have to, for 20 phones to import, that is paid for by 1 wagon of coal. Now, the other thing that the inner city elites love is their overseas holidays, which they carbon offset. Well, actually, they don't. Only about 3% of people carbon offset their airline tickets. But, they may pretend they do that to their friends. All right, so Australia foreign travel, which has to be paid for, is about $60 billion a year. That's 2/3 of our coal exports. Let's say your holiday costs you 20 grand, which would, you're not going to get away with that going to your skiing holiday in Denver or Europe. Well, it's about 100 tons of coal or one wagon of coal. So each of those planes flying off to Europe or America, in round figures, probably a couple of hundred wagons of coal have to be sold by my son-in-law or loaded by my son-in-law so that that can happen. All right, but let's not just use wagons of coal. I want to use another unit, which was a cow's worth of milk a year. It turns out that my son-in-law's uncle owns the farm across the road, dairy farm, and although we don't export milk, because we have our dairy farmers, we don't have to import $7 billion worth of milk. Now, it turns out that one cow in really, really, really rough numbers produces 5,000 litres of milk a year, and that's worth about $4,000. So let's go back to the iPhones, which we know our inner city people love. It turns out the guys across the road allow each cow that they have each year allows 5 phones to be imported each year. And they'd be very, very happy to close down dairy farmers because, my goodness, they produce methane. We can't have that, ignoring the fact that you've got to get your milk from somewhere. All right, so we can also look at coffee. It turns out if you have a heavy drinker of coffee, one of the cows across the road for 1 year will import enough coffee for 40 of the inner city elites to have their fix in some trendy cappuccino bar in the middle of Melbourne. Wouldn't it be a great idea to put the dairy farmers out of business? Who's going to pay for your coffee? Now, one of the points that I'm making is that the society really is very imbalanced. These guys who actually do the work that pays for the stuff, well, the inner city elites are very happy to make suggestions that it should be closed down, ignoring, well, actually, they're ignorant of the fact that that's what pays for this. I think one of the other things is that the people out here in the country tend to be much more practical. They see the reality of where the money comes from. But when you're in your cloistered environment in the middle of the city, they just don't do that. It's a bit of a problem. We have these sort of latte sipping class who are telling what should happen to the production of the country, and they have no idea what actually pays for the production of that. So in summary, I'm sure if people actually knew a little bit more about how economies work, and I've been doing the Australian economy, but it's the same with the UK or the American economy, if they actually understood this, and they actually understood that net zero has huge consequences and closing down these industries has huge consequences, they would be a little bit more reticent to want to close them down. They've got to actually feel it in their own hip pocket rather than somebody else's, probably somewhere out in the country.